Salutations, fellow nerds, and welcome to our virtual feature match area. As Tim has just said, we've got Sebastian Pozzo facing off against Corey Burkhart, Magic's superior Corey B. And joining me on the line is Magic's inferior Corey B, Corey Baumeister. Corey, how you going, mate?
I'm doing even better now because I messaged a good friend of mine saying for sure Riley was going to make a better Corey B joke. So Thank you, buddy. I just proved that within the first 5 seconds.
There was that gear available to me. I also had before Tim opened the show by saying, we've got some of the best players. Well, no, indeed, the very best players in the world playing this weekend. And you'll notice that Corey Baumeister is not playing this weekend. So I don't know what that says about you, buddy, but it was going to be one of those openers. I was sort of tossing around which one I wanted to go with, but I was pretty happy with where I landed here.
Hey, not bad. It just shows your predictability here, so maybe you need a little bit more new material, but that's okay, buddy.
Need some fresh gear, need some fresh, some new lines, something to sort of spice things up a little bit. So, I'll have to stop sounding like a broken record here. We'll see how we go. Anyway, Dimir Rogues opening it up with a mulligan to 6. Agadim untapped means we've got a Thieves Guild and Force to kick things off from Corey Burkhart. Sebastian Pozzo, a slower start from him, but that's fine, playing his control deck. Both of these decks, in essence, are control decks. That's right, Corey.
Yeah, they really are, especially with the slant that Sebastian Pozzo has leaned in with playing all of these counter spells instead of Charming Prince, those kind of looping blink materials that these decks kind of prove to start with, because it's right when a format is kind of new since Omnath got banned. You really just want to be doing the most proactive, powerful things, and then you kind of scale back once you figure out what you're going to play against. So it makes a lot of sense that this is the direction that these Azorius Blink decks have headed in.
I've been playing a ton of Standard recently, and I've been absolutely loving it. It has been this is honestly the best Standard format that I can remember since probably Innistrad Return to Ravnica, which I don't think is ever going to be toppled in my mind. There are just so many different decks. There's so many different ways to attack the format. I've not been doing a lot of winning, but I've still been having fun, which is the mark of just a good game. If you play like a board game, you get crushed and you're still loving it. Like, it's just a good game. But I have to say, I don't like this Rogues deck. Not only in the sense like it's annoying or like it's annoying to play with it. I just don't think it's good.
Honestly, the decks that I've been playing a lot, I would tend to lean with you. I've been playing a lot of the Esper Doom and, it's
Elsa's just so easy Nightmare. To beat, right? Like, every time I can build decks that I've been doing a lot of losing, but still, I feel like if I want to beat Rogues, you can play Croxy, you can play Doom Foretold. There are all these lists that you can play that just absolutely crush Dimir Rogues.
Yeah, no, I'm totally with you. And that right there is a sentiment of good Standard, because we were talking about Omnath, last season, and we're like, well, you can't beat that deck. You have to incorporate it. And that is that isn't as much of a healthy Standard. So right now, when we can both kind of agree that this Dimir Rogues deck, we've both been, having success against it or no ways to attack it, that just makes for a great format when we're able to do so to the best deck in the format.
Burkhart missing land drops here. Got a Ruin Crab, but no land to follow it up with. Going to leave that Drown the Loch, on the bench for the time being. Maze Mine time here for Sebastian, who's obviously digging for something. Activating the Scry ability this much is not something you see all the time.
Yeah, and somewhat a product of you get to blink that later with Yorion, maybe stop it at 3. But yeah, that is slightly an aggressive scry at the draw step when your hand is kind of
it's great already, right?
And against an opponent that is missing land drops, I tend to favor drawing cards there when you're this far ahead. But either or, still perfectly fine.
All right, Ruin Crab procs here as we see Temple of Deceit, Scry, another land at the top. So Burkhart is finding the lands that he needs. Coming back to this Rogues deck, I'm going to make a bold prediction here, and I'm happy for this to be thrown in my face at the end of the weekend. A lot of players have turned up with it. It is our number one deck in the Rivals League. It's got a significant metagame share. I don't think it's going to make it. I think we're going to see a sub 50% win rate for Dimir Rogues this weekend. I just don't think this. I don't think this deck has the chops. Having said that, the best players in the world have assembled and they've brought this deck. They're ready to rumble with it. So obviously they know something that I don't. I just don't get it, Corey. I really don't. I think this deck is just eminently beatable.
I'm actually going to completely agree with you here on this, just because I think Dimir Rogues, especially when you sideboard with this deck, you're still doing the same game plan, right? You still have to mill them to 7 or 8 cards to make your cards very effective, like the Into the Story we're seeing in Corey Burkhart's hand. And you don't really get to shift in any way that like the Azorius decks can do. You can transform into an anti-creature deck. You can transform. You're doing the same thing. So that makes you exploitable. And we're even seeing some spicy hot tech in these Azorius decks in Glimpse of Freedom, I believe it is called, the pay 3 escape 5 draw card. So normally a pretty bad card, but being able to exile 5 cards from your graveyard is just so powerful and so, devastating against the deck that needs you to have a lot of cards in your graveyard.
And there are so many ways to punish a mill deck. Like I've been playing Knights, right? Like it's not a great deck. Manfield posted this list that I've been having a lot of fun with, right? And I play Order of Midnight in it. And you play against Rogues and they mill 6 cards. And you're like, great, get back my inspiring veteran that you milled for me. Thank you very much. And that's not even taking into consideration cards like Croxer, cards like even just little value things like you're talking about, like Cling to Dust and all these other cards that just really reward you having for a nice stacked graveyard. I don't know. Look, I'm very ready to be wrong about this. As I say, players who are much better than me obviously know something that I don't, but I have to say, when I saw these numbers shake out for this weekend, I was baffled because I'm not on this Rogues hype train. I don't think the deck's as good as people think it is.
I'm totally with you. I was much more on the Yorion train, and if we were talking last week, I played a couple of events online, and it was just kind of Yorion Central right there. Yeah. And I thought that's kind of what it was going to turn in. And I think we all have this kind of feeling like, okay, the best deck right away. Ooh, it could just run away, like Omnath has been, like Simic Food or something like that. But I think we're in a completely different world where it's not necessarily one thing is the catch-all. I think each week you're going to metagame to beat the specific deck.
And I mean, look, that's exactly what you want to see in a standard format like this. We've seen this game progress pretty slowly. Although Corey Burkhart able to resolve a key card there in Into the Story. 4 mana, draw 4. You cannot deny the power of a card like that. But here is another powerhouse on the other side of the battlefield. It's Yorion. Blinking here, a bunch of stuff. An Omen, a Saga. There's that Maze Mind Tome you mentioned before as well, Corey. So getting good value, even though, Sebastian didn't draw a bunch of cards. Still able to blink the Maze Mind Tome before it was exiled. And we'll maybe now transition into trying to turn it into a card advantage engine.
Yep, 100%. And we saw, Corey restock and kind of unmulligan with that Into the Story.
Sure.
4 mana, draw 4 is just unbelievably powerful here. And that is really the power of the deck. I mean, the Rogues facilitate the plan, but they're really just facilitating Into the Story. That's what carries these Dimir Rogues decks to just a whole nother level. But, on the flip side, Yorion can do that too, except Yorion has legs. So
yes, attack. Sorry, Into the Story doesn't attack for 4. That's the big thing here. This is going to be a big Lull Mage's domination. This was a real risk for Sebastian tapping out like this because the Lull Mage's domination with what we would normally call threshold enabled here with enough cards in the graveyard means this is just a 5 mana. This is a mind control. This is a mind control of what is arguably the best card in Sebastian Pozzo's deck. Now, look, the damage has been done to some extent. The Yorion has come down and blinked a bunch of stuff. But nicking a 4/5 flyer when your opponent's on 7 life, not a bad way to end a game of Magic here.
Yeah, no kidding. And Sebastian Pozzo's list, the advantages to playing counterspells are pretty clear. You get to interact with your opponent where normally you wouldn't. But the advantages for playing Charming Prince, I don't know if you know this sweet little spicy interaction.
So good, right? Yeah.
You still own that creature, so you can blink it by playing Charming Prince. The first time I did that, my opponent instantly head exploded, and I actually think we went to sideboarding, and then it just showed victory. Like they gave it up. They're like, nope,
I am
done. They switched to a Yorion deck after that too. I'm pretty sure. But yeah, you won't be seeing that from Sebastian Pozzo's list because it is more focused on counterspells.
This is a story I always tell. We've got a bit of a break as we have Sebastian think about this one. So this is a funny story I always tell when people talk about card ownership. This was in I can't remember. I think it was a legacy or no, it couldn't have been because it was. I think the card was literally unsummoned, so it must have just been standard.
Okay.
Anyway, it was an LGS in Melbourne. And my friend was playing another mate of his, and this guy had rocked up without a deck, so he borrowed his deck off of the guy that he was playing against, right?
Okay.
And they're playing and whatever else, and it comes to a point where it was either a Vapor Snag or an Unsummon, right? It was a card that returned a creature to its owner's hand.
Sure.
So he goes, yep, unsummon your guy. And my friend goes, he goes to pick up the card. He's like, no, whoa, judge, calls the judge. Judge comes over and says, this card says return to its owner's hand, right? I lent my opponent the deck, so do I get to pick it up?
That's so good. Of course,
Obviously, he was just mucking around, but it was very funny. And the look on the other guy, on the opponent's face, is like, wait, what? What have I done? Does he get to what? No, of course that's not how it works. But it was a very good laugh, that one.
Like, sorry, I can prove I bought these cards. I own this.
I mean, this is my card. I own this card. It says to its owner's hand. You know.
Imagine the judge calls on that if that were to be
if they were
the
actually
true case.
It's like, well, I remember I opened this booster. I got it out. There are witnesses who can prove it.
Yeah.
All right, here's a Merfolk Wind Robber. This one's being cycled away. This is a useful thing about this card. A 1-mana 1/1 in the late game, usually just absolute garbage town, but being able to cycle it effectively once your opponent is at threshold, has 8 cards in the graveyard, really turns that card on its head. It's actually quite a useful role player.
Totally agree. And I think really what Corey Burkhart was really aiming for there was a 3rd removal spell. We have 8 power coming across, 2 removal spells to clear out 2 of them. If we had 1 more, this game's over. But now with the fact that Corey Burkhart doesn't have a counter spell, you know, we get we do get a nice little turn next turn from Sebastian Pozzo with Yorion Sky Nomad.
Yeah, that's the thing. This is going to be a big Yorion turn for Sebastian next turn, because not only gaining 2 extra life off of the Birth of Miletus, which is going to proc next turn, but there's also that Omen of the Sun, which can be blinked again with the Yorion to gain more life and gain more blockers here. So Corey is kind of adopting this role as the beatdown in this matchup, and I think it's served him pretty well so far here. But Sebastian, I mean, I think a lot of new players are tuning in. 4 to 17, a bunch of creatures. Okay, this one's easily Corey. I don't think, I think Sebastian's actually in a favorable position here.
Wildly ahead, I would say. Is
it really that obvious? Like, is Sebastian that far ahead?
Well, the thing is, I wouldn't say, I guess, wildly ahead maybe is the wrong terminology, because right now, Sebastian does not know that there is not a Drown in the Loch, which is Corey Burkhart's best card. So there is a world where Sebastian doesn't go for this Yorion right here, even though it would be so good, because if this does get countered, you know, Sebastian is really on the back foot here, and maybe he wants to set up a turn where he can Yorion plus neutralize backup and really try to force that through. But with knowing Corey Burkhart's hand here, he would almost assuredly jam this Birth of Miletus, jam this Yorion, try to just get as much value as humanly possible from it.
So the Birth of Miletus can go and get, we've already got a Fable Passage in hand, go and get a Plains and then play the Yorion Blink, once again, do the Blinky Blink and get the value. But we're going to see a more conservative line taken here from Sebastian, playing around that Drown in the Loch that is potentially in Corey's hand and going for the Skyclave Apparition instead. And now this takes out Ruin Crab. Obviously, it can't go after the Yorion with a converted mana cost of 5. So instead takes out the little O3. But here, I mean, not just dead, but still kind of treading water here, Sebastian.
Yep, absolutely. And I mean, we have that tome, coming up, which gives you some life as well. Got an Omen of the Sun to gain some more life at end step if Corey doesn't do anything worth neutralizing. So still looking quite good for Sebastian, but one into the story timed correctly off the top from Corey, and all of a sudden we're right back in it. I want to point out a funny little thing that I saw today, Riley. I posted a status saying, will Yorion reign supreme? There we go. Will Innkeeper prevail? Corey Burkhart actually responded, Yorion will drown just like the rest of them, in the loch. So there's a lot of smack talking here coming from Corey already in the morning. So we'll see if he can walk the loch.
In comes the Yorion. And Sebastian down to just 2 life. And looks like at the moment Corey's very happy to fly on the wings of this bird servant rather than have it drown. And that into the story off the top is a key draw here for Corey, who, it's interesting because I want to say that both players are ahead, which doesn't make any sense at all.
Both player ahead. Stay tuned. More news at 11.
Both players a long way ahead here. Doesn't make any sense. I think the way to put it is that both players are really firing. Both players are really doing exactly what their decks are attempting to do here. And Sebastian is definitely the one who has to sort of dig his way out of this situation.
Yeah. And honestly, I sorry to interrupt you there, but that Into the Story was the draw that Corey really needed to kind of neutralize it, right? Because you had to figure Sebastian was going to be mana efficient here and use his mana at the end. So I really like either Corey playing that temple, saying go with the intention of using the Into the Story and a removal spell, or playing Luris. If it were to get neutralized, then you just immediately fire off Into the Story. The main thing is you got to resolve that because you need some extra cards here to put yourself into this game. And Corey played that quite beautifully.
Some really nice draws there as well. Essence Scatter, Mystical Dispute, in addition to that Heartless Act. So plenty of business here for Corey, who's going to be able to more or less answer whatever Sebastian throws at him this turn, unless, of course, we can somehow finagle this Yorion with neutralized backup. So a scry and gaining a bunch of life off of the Maze Mind Tome here. So as we say, both players just really doing exactly what their decks want to do. Sebastian trying to stabilize the board. There's a land on top.
Yep. And you know Corey's kind of kicking himself for playing that temple instead of the pathway, because withdrawing Dispute, you could have Scatter plus Dispute available for this Yorion play. And then all of a sudden, Corey Burkhart is insanely far ahead. So really not going to work out well here for Corey Burkhart. And you can kind of see him shaking his head. And I've made that look before, be like, yes, if I just played that pathway, discarded the temple, Corey did not need to scry that Essence Scatter to the top or the bottom there. So that may be a little bit of a kicking yourself moment.
Yeah, just a little bit here as we see the Yorion come in, blink a bunch of stuff, and now an attack as well. Can trade off 1/1s here, but now the shoe is well and truly on the other foot. Sebastian, who was down as low as 2 life just moments ago, is now going to go all the way up to, is it 10? Is it 12 as these Omens come back? Look at this, 2 copies of Omen of the Sun come back, and that's going to put the Argentinian back up to 12 life and firmly in the driver's seat in this game.
So when you say shoe is on the other foot, do you think they switched their shoes from left to the right and now wearing them on the opposite foot? Or are they giving their shoe to the other person to wear?
Yeah, I don't know why that saying indicates like now the shoe is on the other foot, as in like now the tables have turned. That makes sense, right?
Yeah.
Like you flipped over a table, it's a very different situation. Now the shoe is on the foot. That's either very uncomfortable because you're wearing a left shoe on a right foot, or you're wearing a pair of shoes that's either probably too big or too small for you.
Yeah.
It doesn't really impart meaningful information. I apologize for using such a useless term there, everyone.
You know, I just I try to just keep you honest in every single situation and just call out all your sayings. And yeah, that one's odd. That one's definitely odd.
It's a stinker. It's a stinker. You won't hear me saying that one again. Here's Heartless Act now. Let's see where this is going. After the Yorion, the 4/5 knocked out of the sky, but the damage has already kind of been done as it came down and blinked a bunch of Omens and provided a lot of value for Sebastian. He's down to 8 now after another attack with the Yorion. Corey's going to have to watch his life total, though. However, he's under a little bit of pressure. Luris can maybe stem some of that bleeding.
The one piece of interesting aspects that we all have as viewers right now is the life total that truly matters. We don't have the counter for it, you know? So it's going to be kind of a surprise to see how many cards are left in library for Sebastian or just against all our Dimir Rogue opponents throughout the weekend here. So it's going to be a little bit of suspense, or maybe our opposite of Rogues players will be nice to us and scroll over their deck quite often.
Over the, I think we're down to around 20 cards roughly.
Yep. It seems about right. You can kind of tell when the graveyard gets to a certain size and the library dwindles. It has a little bit of a visual effect.
So Waker of Waves now discarded. And this card, obviously, it's a weird one for sure. It's a weird one, but it does have utility as an early card selection effect, and even can be brought back with an Elspeth Conquers Death when it's been used in that way. And it's not a great finisher, but hey, you know, it's one of the, it's almost like a split card, right? It's kind of a little freebie you can chuck in there as a piece of card selection that also works as a finisher.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And yeah, a lot of people have decided to play either the 12 creature lists or the 16 creature list. And the one that is always on the chopping block, as we see even in Corey Burkhart's list, he's playing 3 of the Merfolk Wind Robbers. But with Luris, you know, it is a nice little combo of just drawing a card every single turn, you know, getting back a crab as well with Luris. It's just a lot of versatility. But, you know, you play you play the Merfolk Wind Robber and your opponent just stomps it right away, you feel pretty bad because, I mean, your Thieves Guild Enforcer is a nice stomp target, but the other ones don't get hit by it. So I think we have seen a little bit more people leaning towards the 12 creatures, the Rune Crab, Soaring Thought Thief, Thieves Guild Enforcer list, and then just more controlling aspects. But definitely not everyone. So it'll be interesting to see which version is quote unquote correct or which one does better this weekend.
Bone Crusher Giant is just low-key one of the best cards in Standard. And because it's not big and splashy, I think people kind of don't pick up on that a lot of the time. I mean, for all the people at the top end of town, the secret's out. Like Bone Crusher Giant, 2-mana shock with a 3-mana 4/3 is just a ridiculously good deal. And, we often, we talk about the dies to Doomblade test, right? Like if you play a creature and it dies for no value, is it worth it in a format that is ruled by interaction? And an important metric, the one that you talked about just now, is dying to stomp. Like 3 toughness is the magic number in this format. Previously, we've had 4 toughness. I remember during Theros Standard, anything with 4 toughness was a lot safer because we had a lot of 3 damage. This is Bile Blight territory or 3 damage.
Scorching Dragonfire was around. Yep.
Like effects like that. So if Courser of Krufix was a really important card because it didn't die to Bile Blight. Whereas in this format, 3 toughness is the magic number. And honestly, like this is going to sound really weird. Lurrus would be a better card if it were a 2/3.
Oh, yeah, in this specific metagame, I totally agree. And you're right, probably just all around. Lurrus really is not the attacking kitty too often as much as it is just the value card. One thing I will say about Bone Crusher, we had it just be dominant when we were dealing with must-killing Cobras, right? Lotus Cobra. We're still seeing that a little bit from Emma Handy, Autumn Burchett. I believe those were the only 2 playing the Temur ramp strategy that uses Lotus Cobra. Now against Yorion, you don't have as many targets for Stomp, so it's not maybe the best card these days, but still killing Skyclave Apparition, Charming Prince, all that kind of stuff is still very big. So totally agree that card is low-key one of the best cards in Standard.
Sebastian Pozzo there, having to think long and hard about how best to proceed, but ultimately Corey was able to get back into a position to take over that game. That game kind of fizzled out a little bit there. We didn't have a big explosive end. I think Sebastian just realizing that it was a little bit snookered there, so we apologize for that one as a bit of a peter out. But the key turn, the turn I want to come back to, was that into the story. That's where things really changed 100%. For Corey. That's where he turned that game around. It was a very fortuitous card to come off the top of his library, and Sebastian was really unable to match despite playing the Euro, despite getting a bunch of resource, a bunch of extra 1/1s, an extra card, whatever else, in the 4/5 on the battlefield, the fact that Burkhart drew 4 cards, was able to trade 1 for 1, and keep pace with his opponent just really meant that it was kind of lights out from that point onward. Sebastian was swimming against the tide from that point onwards.
Yeah, and honestly, that was 100% the turning moment. And we even saw Corey kind of, shake his head that he didn't leave up the extra blue to have that dispute, where we kind of thought Yorion was going to pull ahead, but it was able to be answered with the spot removal from the Dimir Rogues player. And Sebastian Pozzo also had an option to just hold up neutralize and not play anything there. But Into the Story was not cast the last turn where there was an open window. So Sebastian Pozzo just put that numbers game to the test and was like, okay, well, he didn't have Into the Story last turn, or for sure he would have cast it. And now, and when he used his mana to play Omen, then just got the opening to play it. So really smart.
I mean, great play from both players here. The texture of this matchup is really interesting because I think it's fair to characterize both of these decks as control lists, right? But neither of them are the typical control build that you would expect. Often a control deck typically is based in blue-white, usually plays at most of its magic at instant speed.
Yep. So maybe wrath effects kind of thing. Yep.
Exactly. Mass removal or maybe a big planeswalk or something like that.
Yes.
And don't tend to rely very heavily on creature-based combat. Will often win through, slow attrition, whatever else. Totally Here we've got one control deck in the hands of Corey Burkhart with 1-drop and 2-drop creatures, right? That can actually end a game just by getting in there. And the other side of things, we've got sorcery speed, value-based creatures that almost like mid-range type creatures. When you look at Skyclave Apparition, you look at Yorion, these are archetypical mid-range cards, but still this very weird conjunction of cards in both these decks gives us two what are definitely control decks, but some of the weirdest control decks you're ever likely to see.
100%, and totally agree with you on the fact that this control deck, especially the Yorion deck, is a mid-range deck. And honestly, that's what Yorion Sky Nomad is. It is the best mid-range card that you can possibly be doing. We saw Abzan mid-range. We saw like green-black, even Adventures, which is quite the mid-range deck, be very popular early on. But then when Yorion became kind of this deck that a lot of people were playing, it just became the best mid-range option because the value it gains is so hard to keep up with against other mid-range decks. When you're trying to answer threats on a one-for-one basis by killing them when they come to the battlefield, like Heartless Act, Murderous Rider, stuff like that, if Yorion already gains 3 cards from Blinking Omen of the Seas and stuff like that, it is just far too much value to overcome. So it has kind of cemented itself as the best mid-range deck. And for all you really control fanatics out there that want to see the true control aspect, have no fear. Shota is here because Shota is playing that kind of straight control list. If you haven't seen it, just Dimir control, playing, topping out at Ugin, playing rewinds with Maze Mind Tomes.
And that's Shota Yasuoka who's playing that?
Exactly. Yeah.
Oh, very well. Oh, geez. I mean, color me surprised. That is... I never thought I'd see the day where I saw Shota Yasuoka playing a blue-black pure control deck. Next, you're going to be telling me that he's playing quickly. I won't have it. I don't believe it.
Yeah, no, I won't go that far. But yeah, Shota playing insanely complicated control decks that only he can win with is very on brand. I'm
looking up the list now. All of these lists are available, of course, magic.gg. You can get across that good content you crave.
Yes.
1 copy of Zarath Sand. Sure, why not? 1 copy of Lock Me a Serpent. Yeah, all right, no worries. 1 copy of Shadow's Verdict. I don't know if like Shota just had a bunch of wild cards. He's like, this will do. Oh, why not? I'll try this one. That's good.
Yeah, it's a really interesting take. I'll be excited to see some action from him later on in the day.
2 Reign of Revelation. This list is a work of art. It is a Jackson Pollock painting, but it is truly a work of art. My goodness, he is a stone cold master. I can't wait to see it. Anyway, right now, 2 of the decks that I imagine we're going to see a fair bit of this weekend in the hands of many plays. Of course, Rogues did come in as the most played deck in our Rivals League for this weekend of league play. And it did have a bit of a target painted on its back. Both Corey and I are of the belief that this deck is not all it's cracked up to be. So it'll be interesting to see if the numbers bear out. So far, Corey has put on a good performance with it. But again, I'll stand by my prediction. I'm going to say sub 50% win rate for Rogues players this weekend across both Rivals and MPL.
And I honestly think that is a completely reasonable assumption. I'm happy to be surprised as well because these Dimir Rogues players are the best players in the world here. And this is a very tough deck to maneuver. And it is not forgiving to any mistakes that you make.
Is that correct?
I think so, yeah, because if you just let a certain spell through, without countering it and stuff like that, and you don't know when you have to hold up Drown to the Lock, when you should go for spells and stuff like that, I think it is a very, very difficult deck to play. Right. That's why I stay with my Yorions. It is much more forgiving here. You'd be like, if your first one gets countered, well, you just play that second one that you got in your companion zone.
Well, that's an interesting point. I mean, as this game is kind of progressing a little slowly, maybe we can zoom out a little bit and talk about Rogues more generally. I mean, I'm hard stuck in Plat at the moment. I just cannot get out of Platinum.
Okay.
And but this is not due to sort of being rumpeted up by Rogues decks every day. I feel like I'm reasonable against these decks, and I wonder if it's because all the sweaty tryhards in Plat like me just can't play the deck properly, and I'm not impressed by it. I'm not impressed by it at all. And I wonder if we see such a high percentage of the best players in the world playing it is because it is one of those decks that is so skill testing and one of those decks that enables players like Corey, like whoever else has brought them to the table here, to leverage a skill differential, and then like lesser, small brain fools like me, we see these decks go up, we net deck them shamelessly and play them to such a worse standard. I wonder if that's what's going on there.
I definitely could agree with that, and I want to get to that point in a second, but I want to point out this play right here. Sebastian Pozzo, on purpose, just cycles a shark for 2 here, leaving 1 open, knowing that Into the Story is an option right now to represent Mystical Dispute here.
Right.
Realizing that, the shark doesn't have to be that big anyways. And I guess if you're going to block anyways, a 2/2 makes even more sense here. But still representing that dispute here is a really nice play to protect against that.
Yeah, and it looks like Corey may go for the lure. No, he's gonna pass here. But I mean, Sebastian definitely respects the Into the Story to the point that I don't think he's going to let it just sort of catch him with his pants down.
Yep. And to be fair, I kind of thought that was end step. If it's in combat, you do not want to make a 3/3 up against a 3/2 Death Toucher. But Corey Burkhart did respect that it could be there as a dispute. So really nice play.
Yurion putting the hand here from Sebastian, who's still representing counter magic and actually has it in the form of that force spike there.
Yeah.
Juari Disruption. Such a beating to get gotten by a force spike these days.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we've all gotten got by Censor in the Dimir Inverter days and stuff like that. Yeah. And that is the point I wanted to make up bring up what you were saying is Dimir Inverter was another deck that we were seeing in Pioneer. Actually, what Corey Burkhart won his Mythic Championship
That's right.
His Players Tour, excuse me. And that was another deck that a lot of people picked up, and people are like, I'm not doing well because it's a hard deck to play.
Right.
Corey Burkhart obviously is very good at these style of decks. So if anybody is going to do well in a tournament like this, it's going to be him. And you see even right now these glimpses of freedom from Sebastian Pozzo, just pointing out that people are prepared for this Dimir Rogues deck. Yeah. And that is just a nice card against them. And a lot of blue decks have pretty much adopted that as stock, at least 1 or 2 of them.
I remember when I was on the stream and I'm like thinking, okay, I want to build rogues. The first thing I did was just go to the search bar and type in escape. And then I was like, all right, what are we working with?
Yes.
They just mill over your Elspeths, they mill over your Croxes, and you're like, thank you very much. I'll cast this from my graveyard 1,000 times. Beautiful,
100%. And the one thing that is good for rogues right now is that Yorion decks tend to just absolutely demolish Rakdos so badly that it's really tough to want to play that deck. And Rakdos really does crush Dimir Rogues so much, but it's really tough to play a deck like Rakdos where half the field, maybe even more, is going to be Yorion-based decks. And it's really tough to have that kind of loss. But we do know even one of the GOATs, Paulo Vitor Damaderosa, chose to bring it to metagame against these rogue decks. And that's a decision that you got to be right, Riley, because if you're wrong on that, it's going to be quite brutal.
All right, it's Merfolk Wind Robber now coming down to join its comrade and potentially Lurrus as well, the play here. This will be putting it in the hand, of course. So Lurrus joins the hand and keeping up that Drown in the Loch here. What's Corey sandbagging this counterspell for?
Drawn in the Loch is probably the best or second best card in the deck next to Into the Story. And it's just got to be fighting over that Yorion, I would imagine. Corey is starting to get to a spot where because of all those glimpses of freedoms, he's running out of time to cast this Into the Story effectively. And we even look at Sebastian's hand right now.
Oh, it's never resolving.
Exactly. Seeing it being pretty brutal. Into the Story plus Drown in the Loch is usually enough to force that through. But now that Sebastian has just said, you know what, all I'm going to do is rip apart my own graveyard to make your Into the Story bad and then start casting my meaningful spells, it's been working. And Corey did have that window where he could have cast it early on. It was a risk. But at some point you think like, was it worth taking until you get to a position like this?
Here's the Drown in the Loch now, and there's going to be a Mystical Dispute to defend it, leaving Negate still in Sebastian's hand. So I think he's in a good spot here. And this is the big difference between Into the Story and a card, for example, like Dragonlord's Prerogative, which was an old one from Dragons of Tarkir many years ago, where if you revealed a dragon from your hand, and typically it would be Ojutai, it couldn't be countered. And Into the Story here becomes, it's a powerhouse card, make no mistake about it, but it is a card that, again, you can beat if you need to. You play the negates, you play the hard counters, you find ways to sort of ameliorate the impact of a 4 mana. It's clunky, it's 4 mana, like that's not nothing. Yeah. And here we're seeing the sort of pressure that Sebastian is putting on Corey's game plan. Not on the battlefield, but in the hand.
Yep. Totally agree. It is not the catch-all to the format or anything. It is still an expensive blue card, which always runs the risk of disputes because so many people are, if you're playing a blue deck, you're playing dispute, you know? And that's kind of why we see even a card as powerful as Gadwick not really see any plays just because it's so risky to run into that huge mana disparity of an exchange where you go 7 mana for a Gadwick and you get it disputed. You're like, oh, nice. You know?
And it turns out, which, you know, this is something that surprised me about Mystical Dispute. It turns out that a 3 mana leak is actually playable against the rest of the field. You know, I mean, you know, if you're up against mono red, you're looking at this card like, geez, put this straight in the paper shredder. I never want to play this card again. But still against like Gruul, you know, you snipe an Embercleave with it or something like that. And Mystical Dispute still, I mean, it's not great, but it's serviceable.
100%
in other matchups. We're going to see an escape card answering, or at least attempting to answer, an opposing escape card here. Cling to Dust has been a fantastic role player for a long time. I remember playing that card when Uro was up and about, and it's still doing good work here, cycling away to actually get rid of the opposing Glimpses of Freedom. And while Glimpse of Freedom is a newer card on the scene when it comes to you know, the escape mechanic, against Cling to Dust, it really it can't hold a candle to it. And this Cling to Dust is going to actually have quite an impact on the texture of this game.
Yeah, 100%. Glimpse of Freedom, a card that is probably not even playable in Limited. We'll have to ask our resident Limited expert, Marshall Sutcliffe, on that one later. But that's a card I did not expect to see too much of, but it's just a product of the fact that, you know, we're milling so many cards with Dimir Rogues that you look at any escape card. If you expect to play against this deck, you look at any escape card you can possibly cast. And there was a couple of them I considered from the Azorius side when I was testing this deck. But that does seem like the one that makes the most sense because it's one of the very few instant speed escape cards. You could play Elspeth, Sun's Nemesis as well, but that is a card where you don't actually get to escape as many cards and you have to pay 4. And the 1/1 bodies aren't as relevant, so Glimpse of Freedom definitely being the best one.
No, it costs a full 6 out of the yard. It's very clunky. Like, it's
great.
That's
right.
It's great against. It's great in long attrition-based mid-range battles. I've really enjoyed playing it in a sort of a Mardu shell with Croxa in those situations. But it just gets so badly hosed. Because the good thing about any escape card that's worth its salt, right? It's like if they counter it, like, great, cast it again. Like, counter it, yeah, okay, sure, I'll just cast it twice next turn, right? Because they've been milling you out. Whereas with Elspeth, it's like, all right, tap 6, play Elspeth, like counter it. Like, sure, I guess I'll try again in like 1,000 years when I get to untap. You know, by which side they've already drawn cards, played a Eora and attacked, whatever. So one thing that is funny though for me as we've seen this format develop so far in the Shadow of the Rogues deck is the lowering of the bar of playability of escape cards.
Yes.
You know, you start to look at cards like Fruit of Kizarus and you're like,
maybe. Well, I mean, if the bar before the bans, I mean, the bar was set so incredibly high that everything is so much lower. When Uro, Titan of Nature's Wrath, got banned, that was the one escape card that was a stock for people would have played 6 of it if they could have. And once that went away, Dimir Rogues just became so it gained so much from the ban of Uro, probably more than any other deck, even aggro. Because Yorion is still doing a decent job containing that in some regards, but Uro was definitely containing Dimir Rogues really, really severely.
And now, certainly in the post-Omnath landscape, Dimir Rogues has been let off the leash and is firing on all cylinders. We're watching Corey Burkhart pilot it pretty masterfully here against Sebastian Pozzo. This has been a slog for both players here. They've been grinding really hard, and you can see that we're still well within the mid game of this deck of this matchup in this game.
This was a phenomenal draw, Riley. Adadeem's Awakening. We don't know exactly what's in the graveyard, but I'm sure we got 3 things to target here, maybe only 2, but with only 4 mana available, you either have to Mystical Dispute this or negate it, and then that dispute in Corey Burkhart's hand should be able to force through as long as that one unknown card is not another counterspell, and we know it's not. So
this one's going to work out for Corey, yes. The Agadeem's Awakening in this situation, you can see that Lurrus has been exiled by the Skyclave Apparition, so you know it's only ever going to be X equals 2 unless the Lurrus is in the bin. But even just getting back, I mean, that's just a stone cold 2-for-1 there. You get back a couple of creatures, you're milling them out for a bunch more, and of course that Wind Robber can cycle away at a moment's notice. But here's an interesting card to think about now in Sebastian's hand, that copy of Emiria's Call, which can be a decent finisher, and there's a reason we see it as a 4 of in this list. I don't know how good it's going to be in this spot here, but certainly Angels, 4/4 Angels stand to dominate this battlefield.
Yeah, no, this is not bad at all. That is a quite the scary card here. Another into the story. Yorion is quite good as well, and I would imagine we see Yorion first, just so Sebastian can hopefully draw some permission, some counter spells to be able to deal with an opposing into the story. Or honestly, I'm sure we're getting to the point where we got to start dealing with opposing rogues that come down, opposing rune crabs, just because decking is becoming a very real thing. And one thing that is just very tough against the Azorius, or for the Azorius Blink decks, is you don't have a ton of spot removal outside of Skyclave Apparitions here. Your Elspeth Conquers Death do absolutely nothing, so those are cards you pretty much have to side out. So we don't have that much removal if you're the blue-white side. That's why I tend to favor the Esper sides, because you actually have some spot removal. You can kill these rogues because they start getting out of hand really quickly.
I want to point out a very sweet play that Sebastian made there, and I'm sure older players will be well across it. But for newer players, you may have seen a confusing move made there by Sebastian Pozzo. He had a tapped Yorion, which is of course legendary, and he played a second copy of it, but chose to keep the tapped copy. Now, why is that? It's because the second copy of Yorion blinked the first one, which actually gives you another Yorion trigger from the first Yorion when it comes back onto the battlefield. So effectively what Sebastian has done, and we're seeing this sort of play out over multiple turns because of the way Yorion's templated, we're seeing those omens blinked twice. We're seeing that Skyclave Apparition blinked twice. And this is the longer term value play. Sebastian is not under a lot of pressure. He's still on 16. He's got plenty of life points to play with. And so that fancy play that we saw there actually doubled the value he got from his Yorion.
Yeah, I 100% love it. When you get these kind of loops in play, we don't see it in this matchup as well. But one really cool thing that you get to do, let's say you have a decent battlefield, like a couple Skyclave Apparitions, maybe Charming Prince or something, you get to blink it out and actually protect it from your opponent's Shatter the Sky or Wrath of God effect. As well. So a second Yorion kind of plays the role of a Charming Prince as well, except you don't have to play a 2-mana 2/2 in your deck. That is fine, but it's not anything that's stellar. But that extra value that you can get from a second one is quite awesome.
And you can see now Sebastian fully a hand that has been reloaded and has got plenty of action now. Glass Casket, another copy of Emiria's Call, and a second Skyclave Apparition in addition to that neutralize. That's a key draw here.
And I want to remind everyone watching at home, we just saw a scroll over there, so thank you, Sebastian, or thank you, Corey. We see 24 cards in Sebastian's deck. That's the pressure. That is the pressure. Corey Burkhart has completely given up the damage aspect of this game, and we are facing our attention on the library. And with a couple of Rune Crabs and Fabled Passage, that's going to be a great option for Corey Burkhart to just say, hey, I'm gonna play both of these. Each Fabled Passage, each side of it essentially is 6 cards. That is quite huge.
And check this out. Sebastian is also shifting gears as well. He's moving away from the controlling way and going, you know what, I'll just put 8 power on the battlefield and I'm going to attack you for 12 in the air next turn. What have you got to say about that? Now, Drown in the Loch, a great answer to this Emiria's Call, but this ties in with what you're saying there, Corey. Corey Burkhart going after the library, Sebastian Pozzo clearly now wanting to get on the front foot, wanting to swish around the willow and go for the life total here. So it'll be fascinating to see how this one plays out. Corey Burkhart still with a decent enough life total to play with. He's still going to be able to get some milling done with that Thieves Guild Enforcer. And then, of course, double Ruin Crab plus a fetch land next turn is going to be huge. So who will be able to run down their respective clock faster? Let's see.
Yep, it's going to be interesting here. These crabs are pretty much assuredly going to resolve. You see Corey moving pretty quickly. I think he has done the math as much as he can here. I think this one is going to be picked up by Corey Burkhart here. The Azorius Blink deck in the hands of Sebastian Pozzo just really struggled to put enough pressure in play to be able to answer this. And, so far, Riley Knight, your prediction on the Dimir Rogues, might be in question here so far.
Yeah, we're live. We're live. Anyway, we'll see. We'll see. There's plenty of magic left to play, of course. We see the second Ruin Crab get countered, and so a Temple played instead of the Fabled Passage. Now into the story, taking advantage of Sebastian potentially being tapped out here. Now, you can't pay for Dispute here.
Yep.
But drawing a fresh 4, I think you're still happy to do that. Negate in hand's not a bad one. Mystical Dispute and a Soaring Thought Thief to flash in as well at a moment's notice. Here's Glass Casket now. Sebastian, I imagine, wanting to go after that Ruin Crab, make sure he can defend his library as best as possible. Let's see what he goes for here.
Yep, and one thing I want to point out here, we do have Glass Casket as well for removal. The white base removal, like Glass Casket, Skyclave Apparition, is so good against the Dimir Rogues. One thing that just the color pie of Dimir has always struggled with is enchantments. You know, you really do not have any way to take out enchantments or artifacts really in any great profitable way. So when they get exiled, they're gone. Luckily for Corey, you know, he's had some rogues and stuff already head to the graveyard from attacking, blocking, what have you. But yeah, white base removal, enchantment, artifact removal is very good against these Dimir strategies.
Yeah, exile-based removal is exactly what you want when, you know, your opponent's playing Lurrus, when your opponent's playing Agadeem's Awakening. We're going to see Soaring Thought Thief in response now, as this Thieves Guild Enforcer is also going to hit the exile zone. This ties in with what you're saying there very nicely, because, of course, yeah, usually your opponent kills you one and you go, great, I'll bring it back with my Lurrus, bring it back with my Agadeem's Awakening. And here's Amiria's Call again. Now it's Corey who's under the gun.
We'll see how many creatures we have here. The amount of creatures in the graveyard is going to decide the game here, because we do have a Fabled Passage. So if we got like a crab, there's a crab. That's huge. Is this going to be enough pressure on the library? It's going to be close, but it may not be enough. Right now, we do have lethal on the crackback. These Soaring Thought Thieves can block some of the flyers, but...
And this is why we saw Corey sandbag that Fabled Passage, because he knew that he would want to bring back the Ruin Crab next turn, or he at least would hope to have the option to. And so now Fabled Passage. How many cards left for Sebastian Pozzo? It's going to be very close indeed.
Very close.
Very close, as we see. I mean, that's not very many cards left in the library for Sebastian.
I want to say it's around 9, right? 10. Okay,
10.
So 10.
Oh, laser-like.
Yeah, that is pretty far away here. Now it's what does Corey do to try to stay alive a couple of turns? You know, and we have these creatures to block some of the angels or block Yorion, and then you can possibly add Agadeem's Awakening them back with a little bit of counter protection. But the one thing about Soaring Thought Thieves, they don't trigger when they come into play the mill. They have to attack.
They have to attack, yeah.
That's a tough situation right now. I do remember seeing a Soaring Thought Thief in the graveyard. So if you can combine that with, or a Thieves Guild Enforcer, excuse me, if you can combine that with Soaring Thought Thief, you know, then we got some true mill. But
yeah, good for another 4 cards here. 2 copies of Shatter the Sky, not the card you want when you're the one so far ahead on board.
Yeah, not ideal.
Not ideal for sure. And Corey with a hand full of counter magic, trying to protect himself against a board that is already very well developed, a position usually where counter magic is not at its best.
Yep.
We're going to see an attack. Here's an attack for 12. So forced blocks here for Corey Burkhart. He must block at least one of these 4 power flyers. And with no removal in hand, I mean, he can start to gain life with the Cling to Dust, actually. That's an option, but he still must block even with that.
Yeah. And that's interesting here. If you only
goes for the double block.
I love it. I love it, because you really want to just keep one of them alive anyways. Because then even if you were to, let's say, next turn return Soaring Thought Thief, you can still attack with one of them to hopefully, I would say, push the last couple points of damage across, but really push the last couple points of your library across to try to finish this off.
Let's see what Corey does here. He does have that Cling to Dust. May exile an opposing Yorion in order to gain some life, or may just want to draw a card. I mean, the 3 life actually does nothing at this point. The difference between him being on 1 life and 4 life is largely irrelevant. So yeah, going to go after a non-creature and draw an extra card here. Obviously can't afford to exile any of those. Yeah, look at this. Thieves Guild Enforcer plus Soaring Thought Thief. I think that's just going to do it.
I think because you also get to attack with Soaring Thought Thief, which triggers again.
Yeah. I mean, that's 6 cards. A land drop as well as 9. I don't think Sebastian Pozzo has more than 9. I mean, he's got 9 cards in his library, right?
Yep. I think this is gonna do it here for Corey Burkhart here, as long as he plays this correctly. And it's an unfortunate kind of side effect that Sebastian has 2 shatters in hand. This is just a product of this Azorius deck not having great answers to the creatures. This is not what you really want to have against the Rogues deck, because they play their threats, at such a 1-for-1 basis here, where they never really try to go super wide. So it's unfortunate that those got stuck in the hand. But
so look at this: 2 Thieves Guild Enforcer triggers, milling out for 2, and if our count is correct here, an attack with this Thieves Guild Enforcer, which will trigger both, with the Soaring Thought Thieves, will trigger both, and that's another 4 cards. And there they go. None left in the library for Sebastian Pozzo. The control deck gets milled out, and a masterful performance from Corey Burkhart, who really showed us that this Rogues deck, as I've said all along, Corey, is just one of the best decks in the format.
Yeah, you were totally right when you said this Rogues deck is going to have a well above 50% win rate, Riley. Really nice call there.
Check the tapes. I mean, that's what I said the entire time. We've always been at war with Oceania, and Rogues has always been good. Right now, we're going to go back to the desk. We got Tim Willoughby standing by, my friends, but plenty more Magic coming your way. So stick with us. Right now, it's back to Tim.
Thank you there, Riley. We do have more Magic coming to you very, very shortly. We appreciate you guys hanging around. That was a barnstormer of a match. They got a chance to see the Rogues doing exactly what I was hoping for, milling people out. But we're going to have a little bit different. We've got a Luca mirror, Lucas Esperbateau versus Luca Magni after the break. And if you like the Dimir Rogues, we got them up against Dimir Control. Don't go anywhere. More Magic after these messages.
Hello. Cool. Let me just grab some questions here. All right, awesome. We can get started. Hello and welcome to the Bolt, your rapid-fire introduction to the most exciting players in Magic. And right now, I am joined by Luca Magni. Luca, how are you doing?
I'm pretty fine. Thank you for having me.
Straight into some questions. What is the best color of mana?
The best color is indeed black.
Do you have a favorite format?
I usually like constructed formats. There is not one in specific format, but usually it's like Pioneer or Modern.
What's the worst deck you've ever played?
Worst one? Mm-hmm. I think I played my worst deck at an Italian national championship. It was Esper Tokens deck with Procession and the Scarab God. It was during the reign of Timor Energy, and it wasn't a good idea to bring that.
Yeah, that's fair. What was the first set you ever played with?
As a competitive player, it was Gatecrash, but as a casual player, I would say it was Mirrodin.
And some non-Magic questions. Yes or no, pineapple on pizza?
I'm from Italy, and I have to say absolutely not.
What is the country with the best food?
Really? You have to ask me that? Well, of course it's Italy. Don't trust the French people. It's the best cuisine is in Italy.
And one more question for you. Where can we find you online?
You can find me on Twitter and on Twitch at Lord of Ironforge. I do stream pretty much every day in the week.
Awesome. Well, thank you for talking to me.
You're welcome.
Hello and welcome to The Bolt, the fastest way to get to know the most exciting players in Magic. And right now I am joined by Lucas Esper. Lucas, how are you doing?
Hello, doing great.
Gonna get straight into the questions. What is your favorite Magic deck ever?
I gotta say Mardu Vehicles, just because it's the one I won the most with. It's also really fun to play.
What's your favorite format?
Legacy.
Do you have an all-time favorite card?
That's a tough one. I gotta say Thraben Inspector, because I like to play one-drops. I think it's really disappointing when your first turn is just playing a tap land.
What's a card you really don't like seeing played against you?
Probably Red-Black in Draft.
What was the set you started playing with?
That's 4th edition, some 20 years ago.
Who is your biggest rival in the league? Who do you want to beat?
Even though he's in MPL, I'd say it's Marcio Carvalho, just because every time I lose to him, there's infinite amount of teasing, and I'd rather not go through that.
I'll ask you some non-Magic questions too. Do you prefer cake or pie?
Cake, easy.
What country has the best food?
I gotta say Denmark. My friend Michael Bunde and Thomas Volsen were showing me the food they ate for Christmas, and it looked amazing. I never actually tasted it, but just based on the food, I gotta say Denmark.
Best looking food. Do you have a favorite sport?
Soccer. I watch tons of it, but I also really enjoy American football.
Oh, awesome. Who's your favorite team?
In soccer, it's Corinthians, 2012 World Champions, and in American football, it's the Minnesota Vikings.
One last question for you. Where can we find you online?
You can find me on Twitter at Bertu with 4 U's.
Hello and welcome back, my friends, to this, our league weekend. We've already had one live match, but if you like blue and you like black, we've got a little bit more for you before we get out of round one. We're going to be able to catch up with this match partway through. We missed the first game, but we're going to get a chance to see Lucas Esper-Bertu up against Luca Magni. Both of these guys on blue-black, one on Dimir Rogues, one on Dimir Control. And it's back down to the tables with Riley and with Corey.
Thanks, Tim. Yes, indeed. Back to our virtual feature match area here, jumping in to the beginning of this game here between Luca Esper-Bertu and Luca Magni. I believe that we have the names mixed up there, unfortunately, or the webcams mixed up. We'll get confirmation of which player is which here, but you can see based on the oh no, excuse me. It looks like we've just got the names mixed up because the bottom we've got Lucas Esper-Bertu is the one that we're watching here, playing this Lurrus deck, and Luca Magni on the top side of the screen, who, as you can see, is playing Soaring Thought Thief, but no Lurrus there in making way for cards like Shark Typhoon here, Corey.
Yeah, super interesting here. They are very similar deck, playing, still the same powerhouses of Into the Story, still some rogue plans and stuff like that. But one just leaning on Shark Typhoon as the win con instead of trying to always have to mill people. An interesting take on it, and somewhat of the direction that like Shota is playing, and I believe he is even playing, less creatures than this. So this should be a good one.
You mentioned, as we were kind of breaking down the Rogues deck in our first, we're covering that first match there, you mentioned that it's not a deck that has a particularly robust plan B. It certainly can provide a bit of a beatdown with Soaring Thought Thief and Thieves Guild Enforcer, but it's definitely not, it's not even its plan C. It's somewhere playing like F or G or something.
Yeah.
Shark Typhoon changed that for sure.
Yeah, Shark Typhoon is attacking the metagame at a different way, because there is, a lot of Skyclave Apparition, ECDs, Stomp, stuff like that can deal with permanents, but dealing with the actual Shark Typhoon tokens can be a little bit trickier because they haven't been the most popular of option or of choice from a lot of players. So probably going to get very rewarded in certain matchups and maybe not be as good against hyper-aggressive decks would be my guess.
We are just going to jump over now to Luca Magni's perspective here, because Lucas Esper-Bertu, a little bit of a dicey connection there, unfortunately, man. We've got blurry vision, unfortunately. So we'll jump over to the Italian's perspective here, as he's in the process of casting a Salundi vision. One interesting thing about...
Sorry, Riley, would you call it Blurious instead of Lurrus then for Luca Esper?
I'm so glad you interrupted me to say that, Corey. What a great contribution to today's broadcast. One thing that's interesting about Shark Typhoon, right, and the tokens that it makes is the threats that it produces, their effectiveness is largely dependent upon what kind of interaction your opponent is playing. If we go back a couple of months, Brazen Borrower is everywhere, and it is a fantastic answer, not just on the front half to a Resolve Shark Typhoon cycle there with a token. A 3/1 also blocks a lot of the sharks that your opponents are going to make, right?
100%.
These days, however, Skyclave Apparition is the new hotness. You can resolve a 5/5, a 6/6, a 7/7 shark, and the Skyclave Apparition cannot touch it. So, I'm not saying that it's Shark Typhoon is now an untouchable card or anything, but it is interesting that the texture of the format has changed to a point where we don't have a bounce spell being played in every single blue deck. So Shark Typhoon stock, I think, has risen in that regard because you're more reliably able to attack and block with a shark.
100%. It's so weird for me because it has risen in that sense because there is not many ways to deal with it. And then it's like the aggro decks that are in the format are forced to be very, very proactive, and very, very proactive lists usually lead to Embercleave being your big finish, right? And Shark Typhoon, back in the day, it just blocked creatures, right? Like whenever you got to cycle a shark and trade with a creature on turn 2 or turn 3 or turn 4, it was just insane. A removal spell that draws you a card, natural 2-for-1s, everything you want to be doing in standard. But right now, when you're just maybe chumping a Lovestruck Beast or trying to block with a 5/5 shark to a Lovestruck Beast even, and then they just Embercleave it, it feels so bad. So something you can not really rely on against aggro as much, but increased in stock, like you said, against basically every other deck. So it's interesting that it's, going up in one regard and down in another one. And it's at an interesting spot.
You can sort of, put your finger on the scales when it comes to the Gruul matchups or the Lovestruck Beast matchups, mono green, whatever it is. In other ways, you've got the Heartless Acts, you've got the Sweepers, you've got other ways to deal with stuff like that. But I mean, Shark Typhoon has always been a powerful card. I think a lot of us slept on it early. I remember when it was first printed, we all thought, "Oh yeah, here's the joke card." They put in a gag. It's funny. Yes. There's the Sharknado. Ha ha ha. Got us a good one, Watsy. Well done, R&D creative. But I think they kind of zagged on us a little bit because we all expected it to be kind of a bad card, and it ended up being like really good. And it took a while to wake up to that because it's a little bit of a goofball card, right?
Yes. No, 100%. And you're still going to see that card in people's back pockets whenever control decks, kind of draw go decks, become very, very popular. Shark Typhoons increase, exponentially because it is just something you always want to be casting threats at your opponent's end step. So the more a format kind of gets into that position, the more we're going to see that card.
Increases exponentially from 1 to 2 to 4 and then...
Yes, exactly.
No, card's really good, and I'm just casting my eyes over Manu's list, and 4 Ruin Crab, 4 Soaring Thought Thief, and that's it. The rest is just removal, counter spells, and card draw, and then 4 copies of Shark Typhoon. I don't know if this is the best Rogues build. I mean, I'm not saying that, but it certainly is a different take on a familiar classic, and I mean for that, Luca's going to pick up at least a few points just for the surprise factor.
Yeah, 100%. And it's so weird to even call this deck Rogues at this point because it's just as much a Crab tribal deck and Shark tribal deck as it is a Rogues tribal deck.
That's a very good point. Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, Crab tribal. Yeah. Crab tribal. People up in arms about it, loving it.
One thing I do love when this deck, you can see they're not leaning as much into the mill plan, but you still need to make your Into the Stories as powerful as possible, leaning on just actually killing things, countering things to get up to 7 cards the old-fashioned way. These escape cards are going to be even better against them, and that's kind of why you have to play cards like Didn't Say Please.
Yeah.
Normally not the best Magic card. A 3-mana counterspell, you almost always want to play Dispute because it has a much higher ceiling when you can cast it for 1,
or at least neutralize, right? Which can cycle away.
Or neutralize, yes, exactly. So that is a card you don't see often unless you very much need facilitators to get some cards into the graveyard.
Couple of interesting twists and turns in Lucas Esperbird 2's list as well. He's playing 2 copies of Seagate Restoration, which certainly isn't standard technology. We don't see that flip land in every list. Only 1 copy of Lull Mage's Domination, but the full 16 creatures. He does have the full suite of Rogues and Crabs. In addition to 2 copies of Call of the Death Dweller, you see a copy of it in hand. So rather than going all in on Agadeem's Awakening, Call of the Death Dweller, which I don't know. I mean, Call of the Death Dweller, often you want to be getting something out of the Menace, something out of the Death Touch. We saw it typically used with stuff like Mayhem Devil. We see it sometimes with the little 1/1, what is it, Fireblade Charger, I think it's called.
Yep.
In order to make the most of that Death Touch there. But I guess, just, again, the Rogues deck will take 2-for-1s all day long. And I suppose the Call of the Death Dweller is that.
Yeah, it's interesting to me as well. I would tend to lean on Agadeem's Awakening as well, just to the fact that it is a land which is very versatile. Call of the Death Dwellers, it is very, very unlikely that you're going to be casting that on turn 3. But the one thing that I do like as kind of a pseudo nice play against other rogue decks is they mill you just as much as you mill them. So if they're aggressively milling you with turn 1 Thieves Guild Enforcer into Soaring Thought Thief, there's a chance that you can just call the Death Dweller a good value turn. Yeah, just turn 3 it.
The other thing, while we're comparing these two cards, Agadeem's Awakening to Call the Death Dweller, is they both basically do the same thing. It's just that Agadeem's Awakening does it for 5 mana and Call the Death Dweller does it for 3. It's not very often that Agadeem's Awakening will be cast for any more than 2. You can cast it for 3 if you've got a Lurrus in the bin, but you're never casting it for X equals 4 ever. So Call the Death Dweller is just kind of an encheapened Agadeem's Awakening in that regard. Having said that, can't play it as a land, and I think that does give Agadeem's Awakening the nod from my perspective. But again, Esper Virtute is innovating, and right now, Standard being what it is, it's a more open format that we've had in a long time, and I think it's rewarding players who are willing to take a bit of a punt on cards that aren't seeing orthodox play in regular lists, and that's really good to see.
And one thing I really want to point out to everybody watching this and thinking, hey, I really like someone's deck, I want to pick it up. The one trap that we do fall in a little bit when it comes to these style of tournaments, these are very, very specific, narrow tournaments where you expect a very certain metagame a lot more than in a big, let's say, Red Bull Untapped event or something like that.
Or even just the ladder.
Or even just the ladder. You're going to play against a wide variety of things. So even, I'll use the great example of what Paulo sent out. He's like, I do not recommend my deck for ladder play or really for any tournament, but it is a metagame trying to take advantage of other Dimir decks, hoping that it is the most played deck. It was, but that doesn't mean that you just pick up, one of the best, if not the best players in the game's deck list in the form of Paulo Vitor Damatorosa and just expect to crush with it, because these are much different tournaments and they have to be looked at in such a way as well.
And also, you're not Paulo Vitor Damatorosa. Don't think that you are. You're not. You think you're that good, but you're not. Let me tell you this. You're not as good as him. You're not even close to being anywhere near as good as him, mate. So just calm your farm a little bit before you pick up the Brazilian superstars list and expect to, immediately Mythic 1, easy peasy.
Easy, yeah, 100%. I've fallen into the trap of trying to pick up a Shota control list from a Pro Tour that's heavily metagamed for a specific metagame as well, and then just being like, wow, I can't win a game with this.
That's it, and now he's a washed-up former pro doing commentary, so, don't take that route. Don't end up like Corey Baumeister, everyone. Jeez.
Exactly. Right.
Lucas Esper 2 going down in game number 2 there, as we saw Manu was able to put enough pressure on in the air, whittling down that life total critically, as we said before there, Corey, with a shark token. We're going to take a quick break here, and then we'll be back with more sideboarding and more analysis, high-level stuff from both Corey and I. Stay with us, my friends, a very short break, and then we'll be back with more Magic. And welcome back to our virtual feature match area here, where we're gearing up for game number 3 between Luca Magni and Lucas Esper 2. My name's Riley Knight, and I'm joined by Corey Baumeister.
Hello.
Who some have described as a washed-up, talentless hack. Certainly not my words, but
no, it was your words, Riley.
Look, Corey, we've got to move on, mate. We don't have time to sit here about, who said what, when things were said about whom or whatever. We've got a game of Magic to commentate here. Both players with we've got a mulligan from Lucas Esper 2 and a weird hand here from Luca Magni, right?
Yeah, an interesting hand, heavy power level here. If we can, get this crab to actually mill the 7 cards with Into the Story. It's kind of a weird number. Everything is kind of that magic 8 number to get stuff going as far as the rogues go. But Into the Story is 7, so a little bit different there. But yeah, without Rune Crab or other things actually flipping cards, into the graveyard, these 7-mana spells are probably not going to be great. So definitely needs a little bit of help. But on the flip side, Luca Esper Bartol's hand is not great either, and need some help as well. We got the land, which was absolutely huge.
Yeah, nice little curve out here. 1 drop into 2 drop, and now we can start to make merry with the Thieves Guild Enforcer. And you see the main phase Soaring Thought Thief not only playing around counter magic, but also getting an extra 2 cards in the bin with that Thieves Guild Enforcer. Back over now to Manny, who pulls a Soaring Thought Thief off the top of the library. So his hand has improved enormously here.
Huge.
An opening hand of 4 lands, Ruin Crab doubled into the story has really matured very nicely into Drown in the Loch and a Soaring Thought Thief to round out the early turns. And then, of course, those into the stories are really going to benefit Magni as we transition into the mid to late game.
Agreed. So here is the big decision that Luca has right now. With Drown in the Loch, Rune Crab, and Soaring Thought Thief, your choice is either play Rune Crab, mill, then your crab is left pretty vulnerable, or you play Soaring Thought Thief, and then next turn you line up Rune Crab, mill you 3 cards, so now your Drown in the Loch can counter up to a 3-drop to protect your Rune Crab a little bit. I love this line from Luca. You kind of get incentivized or really get pushed in the direction of playing Rune Crab because you need to get cards in your opponent's graveyard, but there is a high likelihood that it just dies to a Heartless Act or any kind of removal, and then you're in a bit of a rough spot. So even if this dies here, this next turn of Rune Crab, mill, and have Drown in the Loch to counter the second removal spell is going to help a lot. But with that being said, the powerful combination of Thieves Guild Enforcer and Soaring Thought Thief is 6 damage coming across the table once you get that magic number of 8 cards in your opponent's graveyard. So this is a quick clock that is going to have to be answered very shortly.
The thing about this quick clock is any deck with even the smallest amount of removal can pick apart this clock, right? Like,
yes.
I'm not trying to say that the Rogues deck isn't able to deliver the beatdown, but it certainly can, because it certainly can. But, these creatures, they die to a slight gust of wind. We're talking about 4 2s and 2 3s. We're not talking about 6 6s, 5 5s that are getting, suited up with an Embercleave and getting in there.
Yes.
But if you don't have those answers, if your hand, for example, is full of Into the Story and Duress, sometimes you can just, get your teeth kicked in by, by this, the Thieves Guild Enforcer and the Soaring Thought Thief. So, there's a balance to be struck, certainly, and I think there's a little bit of internal tension that between when facing the Rogues deck about how you want to fight. Do you want to contest the battlefield? Do you want to contest the stack?
Yeah.
But again, none of these problems are without solutions, and I think the Rogues deck remains very beatable.
Definitely, totally agree, and that is something very well said, Riley.
Oh,
I gotta avoid saying things like that.
Well,
what am I thinking?
What are you thinking, mate? Because that one,
I'm
keep
learning.
that one. Keep that
I'm
one.
learning, buddy. I'm learning. Like you said, novice commentator over here. but when you're trying to approach matchups against these Dimir decks, the spells are the most important things. So if you're bringing in all these negates, Mystical Dispute, sure, those are great for the late game, but there are plenty of games when you just have this start 1 drop into 2 drop and say, hey, you also have to deal with these. So that is the dynamic where I know we were saying Dimir Rogues is this one-sided game plan where it's kind of doing its specific thing. It does have a little bit of a juke here where it does have creatures that you can play early as well as the huge dynamics spells, excuse me.
So Drown the Loch here is going to take out either one of those creatures on the other side of the battlefield. Alternatively, there's Into the Story if you're happy to take another pounding here. But it certainly is a lot of damage coming across from Lucas Esper 2. And another Thieves Guild Enforcer as well turns up the heat even further. 1 mana 4/2, huh? Pretty good.
Pretty solid. Mill 4 cards, no big deal. Really interesting that we didn't want to leave up Drown in the Loch. Luca Esper Bartu is very much hoping that island was a swamp there so you could, play everything essentially. But being an unknown card for Drown in the Loch, that is definitely a cost to not playing that. Oh, that was end step. Excuse me. Okay. No, now that's perfect.
All right, so there's a swamp now here for Lucas, and in come the clowns once again. This is going to demand a response here from Luca Magni.
Yeah.
Okay, going to block 1 with the crab. And yeah, wow, just go down to 1. So an Into the Story here, which I think is going to run straight into the opposing Drown in the Loch. Is that right?
You would think, but here's the thing. I think you could pretty much do anything with this Drown in the Loch, and it's probably going to give you a win.
Just kill your own Soaring Thought Thief.
Okay, maybe not that. You're right. Good point. Good point. Thank you for that, Riley. Thank you for that expert analysis there. But now with another Into the Story, the only way Luca comes out of this is Drown in the Loch and then just 2 more removal spells. That's a lot to ask from the top of the deck. And yeah, just taken down quite easily with the creature package.
Not going to find it. And, you know, we did characterize these 1 and 2 drops as the, not even the backup plan, but sort of the backup to the backup